I'm here today because I remember most distinctly the day that this happened. I was also working with high school girls as a secondary school teacher, and we talked about this, and it was a horror to them. Ever since that day, I have kept the pin that I was given by the Secondary School Teachers Federation, all of us were, to wear in memory. Also, I'm very much against the government's position on gun control. I feel it is very wrong. And the other reason is that I always tie this day into a memory of my aunt, whom I never met, but I'm named after, who was brutally murdered when she was 22 years old while she was a teacher in northern British Columbia. I remember.
December 6th is an important date to remember because I work in a shelter here in Leeds-Grenville that every day is filled with women and children fleeing domestic violence.
Wow, 25 years. I remember like yesterday, not because I was there, because my older brother, a professor at the École, called me that evening and said he was there, he saw what was happening. Okay, they were not engaged, they were not allowed to move anywhere. They finally got off campus, but he remembers the sound of gunshots and seeing people moving around. So it goes to prove that these things happen anywhere, and we have to be careful and know what's going on. So sad day, but let's make sure it never happens again.
December 6th is a reminder that gendered violence is still very much prevalent in our society. On this 25th anniversary, we have made some progress, but there is still much work to be done. Violence against women is not a women's issue, it is a societal issue. Both men and women need to be part of the solution if we are ever going to see social change. Today, we gather as a community to break the silence surrounding violence against women and children. We give voice to those who have lost. We have lost at the hands of violence, and for those whom violence is a daily reality. These are our daughters, mothers, sisters, grandmothers, granddaughters, aunts, nieces, cousins, and friends. Today, as a community, we confirm our commitment in advocating for a future without violence.
I remember when, December 6, 1989, I was a university student doing my Master's of Education in Ottawa, and I heard on the radio what had happened in Montreal. My father was also in Montreal that day, visiting his sister, so he called me to tell me what had happened. I've also been involved for many years in planning the local December 6 events, and I've worked in the field of serving victims of violence for about 25 years. So I remember it quite well and still see what's happening to victims of violence on a daily basis.
My hope for my granddaughter is that she can go to a bar without having to watch her drink, that she can walk home in the dark without me worrying about her, and that my grandsons can express their feelings openly and advocate for women's rights without being emasculated.
I remember because 14 women were killed simply because they were women. At Girls Inc., we believe that girls have the right to have confidence in themselves and to feel safe in this world.
I remember because my 3 daughters deserve to grow up in a world where they are safe, respected, and treated equally, regardless of their gender.
I remember because I want to honor every man, woman, and child affected by gendered violence, and I commit myself to working towards ending this violence in our community.
I refuse to forget because women have only been declared legal persons in Canada for 85 years. I refuse to forget because as someone who works with children and youth, violence against women is a real problem. Some people in countries still don't get to go to receive their education freely like we do in Canada. I think girls and women have the right to feel safe in our environment and community, so I encourage you not to forget either.
So we must remember what happened so we can continue to raise awareness on domestic violence and give the women and men who suffer at the hands of another a voice and for freedom and hope.
So my memory of 25 years ago, I was mayor of Brockville. I just turned 29 myself. It was a life-changing experience. I recall and I remember seeing in a clipping recently in one of my scrapbooks, we had a meeting shortly after it happened, and I asked all the council and everyone that was in the council chamber to observe a moment of silence because it was such a horrible act. And now, 25 years later, every year in the legislature, all three parties devote 5 minutes to make a statement regarding what happened on December 6th, 1989. And I always remember, at least when they have the debate in the chamber, I always go back to that time as a mayor, thinking about how awful it was and how we as politicians, because I was a politician then and am today, how we have to draw a line in the sand against violence against women. How we all have to stand up and denounce what happened and try to put into place legislation or just awareness that what happened then can never happen again. And let's face it, there have been some very high-profile cases in the media lately, and I think we all have to, again, draw a line in the sand. Do whatever we can do to make sure this never, ever, ever happens again. So I'll always remember December 6, 1989.
So I was only 16 years old on December 6, 1989, and I don't remember the event happening. I don't remember the shooting, but I've participated in and attended events commemorating the 14 women who were murdered that day since that time. And I think it's really important that we continue to remember. Basically, it's about remembering violence against women, honoring these 14 women and their families who were murdered. And they were specifically targeted because they were women. So I believe that that's why it's important that we, discuss violence against women on this particular date. And that we remember that it is ongoing. Violence against women happens every day in Leeds-Grenville, in Ontario, in Canada, and throughout the world. And we really need to continue remembering and discussing it because it's not going away. If anything, maybe getting worse. And so there aren't very many days where we are encouraged to discuss this topic because it's a difficult topic to discuss. But this particular day is one that's set aside to remember and to commemorate and to discuss it. And I believe that it's really important that we continue to do that.
Well, I do remember the December 6th incident. I was 11 when it happened, and at the time, it didn't really mean that much to me. Being so young, I remember my parents talking about it. And one of my cousins was going to school in Montreal at the time, so there was concern that, whether or not she was okay, and it turned out that she was. It's only as I've gotten older and done studies in women's studies, a minor, and a social work degree, that I've really come to realize how disadvantaged and how women get treated differently than men. And it's kind of become a bit of a goal for me to work towards ending not just violence against women, but violence against people in general. And for me, the way that I think that needs to happen is people need to start being compassionate with one another again. I think we've become very individualistic, where we're concerned about our own lives, our own best interests, and I think we need to come back towards a collectivist frame of mind where we're looking out for each other, showing compassion, care, and consideration for others.
"25 years ago, I was a college student looking at a career in policing, and when the news of this event came out, obviously, as the rest of the world was, shock and dismay. And really, at that time, it was one of the first times you'd ever heard of a mass shooting. And certainly for us and for myself, the fact that somebody could do this and, use the term feminism as the reason why it caused him to do this, it certainly was puzzling, to say the least. And I think for me, it just solidified the fact that I wanted to go into policing and make it a career of choice, and certainly hoping that we'd never see an event like this again, knowing that if it did occur, that we'd certainly be ready to respond. And times have changed since that, obviously, and a police response to a shooting such of this magnitude is completely different than it was then. And once again, just drawing the light to the fact that, violence against women, it's not acceptable. It's unacceptable. And as we move forward, we'll continue to do everything we can to make sure that it doesn't happen any longer. It needs to be stamped out.
I remember when I was in high school and my brother had a part-time job with one of the plants in town, and one of the girls that I also went to high school with also had a part-time job. He had the same job, the same hours, the same responsibilities, and at the same location, and he was making $1 an hour more than she was. And not only was that legal at the time, it was actually culturally acceptable, because when I would ask why that was, everybody looked at me like I had three heads, but they also would say back to me, of course he makes more, because girls don't need money, because they're to be taken care of by boys, and that is a boy's responsibility. I also remember when I was in high school, in grade 9, one of the girls I went to school with wanted to take shop class. But when I was in high school, we were not allowed to. Girls weren't allowed to take a number of classes, shop especially. That was just for boys. She started to fight back. It was a legal fight. It took 3 years. And in grade 11, I think, or grade 12, I was a little iffy on that, she was the first girl in this district, in the Upper Canada District School Board area, to attend a shop class. And because of her now, all the girls within this area, and probably within Ontario, for all I know, or Canada, can take shop classes in whatever class they want. I remember when the Montreal Massacre happened. I remember because younger women say to me now, when I say, come and do this and say what's important to you and why this is important, they say to me, well, I wasn't even alive when this happened, because they have no memory of it. They were too young. But these women are police officers in working for fire departments. They are working in construction zones. They're going through to be engineers. And yet they think this happened so long ago that it doesn't apply to them. But, you know, I'm not really that old. And this happened when I was a teenager and a young adult. So it really hasn't been that long. And, you know, for the younger generation, they can be police officers or firefighters or electrical engineers or whatever they want because of the work and the sacrifices of the women, including the 4 that were killed at the Montreal Massacre.
So I remember because this happened actually the year that I was born, and it was one of the first in-school shootings, especially in Canada, and now we're seeing quite a number of them, and violence isn't the answer. So I remember because I would like to end violence in our community.